Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again to our continuing look at the video games of James Bond. This time we're taking a look at The World Is Not Enough for the PlayStation 1, which was released in November of the year 2000, and it has a kind of a special place in my heart, being the first Bond game released in my lifetime since I became a big Bond fan, so I remember being quite hyped and quite pumped for this game's release. It was around the late 90s that I became a big fan of this franchise, and GoldenEye on the N64 had become a staple pastime for me and my mates, so the prospect of that experience being replicated on the PlayStation was really exciting. The World Is Not Enough marks a return to the first-person shooter perspective after the third-person format of Tomorrow Never Dies, which was released on the same platform the previous year. The goal is clearly to recapture some of that N64 GoldenEye magic, and that's arguably what every Bond game has had as a goal since that iconic shooter was released. In this video, I will be talking about the gaming elements, of course, but this is a Bond channel, and primarily this will be about how this game shapes up for a Bond fan rather than a hardcore gamer. All that being said, settle in, grab your controller, as we take a play through The World Is Not Enough for the PlayStation 1. Loading up the game, players are first treated to an intro video / trailer for the game that they're about to play, intercutting clips from the game with snippets from the film. It's hardly a seamless experience, but I guess that they had the license to use the clips from the film, so they were determined to make the most of it. Moving on to the menu, which utilises that lovely teaser poster image of the flaming woman and the Bond silhouette, players are invited to start a new game, and there are two difficulty settings to start from, Agent and 007. For the purpose of this video, I played as Agent, so it's on to the first mission, Courier, which begins with briefings in turn from M, R, and Moneypenny. This feature feels like a holdover from GoldenEye on the N64, which did a similar thing. M gives you a bit of mission information, R tells you what your gadgets are for, and Moneypenny...
James, do take care of yourself. And remember to bring me back a souvenir from the trip.
Adds nothing of value. I find it curious that despite using the likenesses of Judi Dench and John Cleese, the Moneypenny image doesn't seem to be Samantha Bond, who of course played the character in the film. Which makes it all the more curious why they even bothered to include her at all, but I guess, you know, if it was good enough for GoldenEye, it's good enough for this game. Now, if GoldenEye jumped out of a window, would you... Anyway, on with the game, as we are introduced to the first level with a clip from the film of Bond entering the office of a Swiss banker in Spain to interrogate said banker about a dead MI6 agent and retrieve a briefcase of money. The level immediately begins with a prompt to open up your Motorola clamshell organizer to read the controls, which are very simple, but I just love that Motorola got some product placement in this game, and just the device itself is so cute and a time capsule of the era in which it was made. Anyway, after that, it becomes clear that despite Pierce Brosnan's face being slapped over much of the game, his appearance in cutscenes, and his likeness being used for the model of James Bond, the actor himself did not return to voice the character.
May I help you?
I'm here to see La Chaise. The name's Bond. James Bond.
But rather we have actor Tim Bentinck in the part, and he would also go on to voice Bond in 007 Racing, and even according to the many lives of James Bond in which the actor is interviewed, he would also go on to do some pickup lines for the character in Everything or Nothing, which Brosnan voiced for the most part, so that's really cool. It's actually really interesting in this book, because they kind of talk to Bentinck about how he approached the role, and basically the main objective was just sound like Pierce Brosnan, and Bentinck does a really admirable job at that, particularly when it comes to mimicking Brosnan's kind of strange Irish mid-Atlantic hybrid accent. Bond is denied entry by a sharply featured receptionist, and then the game allows for something that I really love. If you've seen any of my other Bond game reviews, you'll know that I'm a big fan of when Bond games allow the player to accomplish objectives via a multitude of ways, and it's present here in the very first level. Bond must pass through a metal detector, and it's up to you to decide whether you activate the VFL disruptor to breeze through without anything happening, or you can choose just to waltz through, set off the alarm, and immediately get to shooting. I know this may sound like a very small feature, and such open methods were not exactly new at the time this game came out, but the Bond games are/were licensed movie tie-ins, and by virtue of that are not necessarily top priority for the companies releasing these things, like their own intellectual properties would be. So anytime a Bond game is more than just A to B, I'm excited. It's still A to B, obviously, but it's A via C, and then maybe stopping off at F, and then maybe going to D, and then B, and EA were just really good at implementing this in their Bond games, so I'm kinda happy right off the bat. Funny though how the one thing that the guards don't seem to mind is if Bond goes and sucker punches the receptionist at the back of the head. Yeah, I never liked her anyway. Eventually you reach the higher floors of the building where security is tight, and thus Bond whips out his Wolfram P2K, and it's time to start taking out security cameras if you want a stealthy approach, or you can just blast right in if you want to shoot some goons. Just on the controls, I was playing this with a PlayStation 2 controller, so I was using analog sticks for motion, and generally, while there's obviously a degree of clunkiness when compared with more modern shooters, I found the controls here to be quite receptive, easy to use, and even in some of the more frantic moments later on in the game, they were never cumbersome. I also really like how the gadgets are incorporated into the mission with the VFL disruptor earlier on, and then finally to access Lachez's office, you need to scan a fingerprint from what I can't decide is either a coffee thermos or a massive cigar holder, but either way, love the gadgets are getting good use here, and I love that so many of them come from the phone from Tomorrow Never Dies. It's a nice bit of continuity. Anyway, Bond heads in to meet Lachez, and we get this rather clunky cutscene.
The report that Sir Robert King bought was stolen from an MI6 agent who was killed for it. I want to know who killed him.
It's a terrible tragedy, but...
The name, Lachez.
All right. But you'll have to protect me.
So obviously this is of its time, and I'm not expecting anything photoreal, but even with the capabilities that they had at the time, what are we supposed to think she did to the guy that actually killed him? There's nothing in her hand. Does she have an exceptionally powerful karate chop? I also love how Bond does nothing to apprehend her. She just runs away and he's all like, well, that's the damnedest thing I ever did see. But never mind that, grab the briefcase, smash the window, and it's mission complete as the game is treated to another movie cutscene to wrap things up, in which Bond is walking along a bridge in Spain, all very peaceful, but then the briefing for the next level begins in a somewhat alarmist way.
007, a bomb has exploded at MI6 headquarters.
I have no idea how this would play to someone who hadn't seen the film, given that they're using scenes from the film anyway. I would have thought that one of the more necessary ones to show in a cutscene, or, you know, even just have the player play through it, would have been the explosion at MI6 and how that happened. But hey, you know what, this Judi Dench impersonator isn't too bad, and then we have a lengthy, truncated version of the Thames boat chase from the movie, but sadly the next level is not you piloting the Q-boat around the Thames, but rather chasing the Cigar Girl assassin around East London Docklands. Small thing, but it does annoy me how the cutscene clearly shows the Cigar Girl reaching the Millennium Dome, but then the level begins with the Millennium Dome on the other side of the river, and I also love how just slightly down the embankment are the Houses of Parliament, despite these landmarks being pretty much on opposite ends of the city from one another. This is an all-out action level and one of my very favourites. There are plenty of baddies to shoot and weapons to use, and while it's not a level that will reward much in terms of exploration, there's a lot going on, and you're in and out of buildings, using a sniper rifle, shooting up a pub where the barman is a goon apparently. This old lady didn't know what she was letting herself in for when she popped in for a sherry this afternoon. It's also a very patriotic pub, by the way. I mean, look at that massive portrait of Churchill above the fireplace. The Cigar Girl escapes on a hot air balloon that looks as if it's about to go and join a pride parade somewhere, but Bond uses his trusty grappling watch and the level ends with him grabbing on below. Of course, the cutscene shows the balloon exploding and Bond falling down the Millennium Dome. The next level, Cold Reception, begins with a big old data dump of an expository briefing from M, who introduces players to Renard.
The attack on MI6 and the assassination of Sir Robert King appears to have been the handiwork of Victor Zokas, also known as Renard the Anarchist.
The name's Anarchist. Renard the Anarchist. We get all the details quite succinctly, really, about how Renard set up the explosion at MI6, killing Sir Robert King. Then, also, we get the exposition about how some years previously, Renard had kidnapped King's daughter, Elektra. M had sent 009 to rescue her, but he died on the mission, but not before putting a bullet in Renard's head, which, of course, didn't kill the baddie. However, here there's nothing on how the bullet is affecting Renard's senses, which is an odd gimmick for them to leave out of the game. A villain with reduced senses would have made perfect sense for this kind of media. But anyway, Bond is sent to protect Elektra as she goes to examine her deceased daddy's pipeline. This is a snowy mountain-based level with Bond on skis, and while this is a nice thing in theory, in practice it just makes Bond really difficult control. It's kind of hard to get the character moving, and when you do, you just end up sliding around a damn sight more than you intended, and it's annoyingly tough to dodge the fire of the circling Parahawks. Lining up a shot is difficult, but maybe it's all worth it for the big hills you get to slide down. Whee! Oh, baddie, die. Protecting Elektra is a part of the mission too, but for the most part in my playthrough, protecting her wasn't all that much of a chore. She generally went and took shelter in a corner, and the goons were more bothered about shooting Bond than her. So that's at least one GoldenEye trope that didn't survive through to this game. We'll get to you someday, Natalia, and when we do, oh, Oh, when we do. Things end with Bond and Elektra bubbled up in the Q jacket, and in a bit of odd editing, we have Elektra freaking out, Bond punches a hole in the snow, but then the next cut is just him climbing out, so they completely omit the entire point of that scene, which was Bond calming Elektra down as she freaks out from the claustrophobia, and holding on them, looking into each other's eyes, and making an emotional connection in that moment. I'm not expecting a PlayStation 1 era game to replicate the drama from the film verbatim, but it is one of the more important character moments and pretty central to how Bond is going to feel about Elektra later on in the film, and that conflict, and it's important to the story, so it's kind of a curious omittance, I think. The next level is one of my favourites in the game, and something that I'm surprised hasn't been replicated in Bond games since. The whole point of it is to interrogate Valentin Zukovsky, but Zukovsky wants money before he'll talk, so he gives Bond some to go and play in the casino with, and if you come back with $100,000, he'll talk. So, sure enough, off you go into another room and play blackjack, and this is so cool, and I remember booting up the game when I was a kid just to play this little mini-game. This time it did get me thinking, why haven't we seen this replicated in other Bond games? Gambling and casino scenes are such a staple of the film series, it feels like a natural element to incorporate into the games, and I can only suppose that there are probably regulations regarding these things, and the age ratings for the games would probably need to be higher if such things were included, but here it's a really nice little touch.
Hit or stay? Well played, Mr. Bond.
The entire level is really just facilitating that mini-game. There's no shoot-'em-up action or anything, but the level is also notable for the world's worst combination Robbie Coltrane impression and Russian accent.
Bond! James Bond! For do I deserve this great honor?
It's so nice to see you again. My limp has much improved. Also notable are the ladies in this level who all perform this bizarre motion. I have no idea what this is supposed to be. Is this the kind of thing that any human being does naturally, or is it some kind of strange yoga?
Have you met my boyfriend? He's head of casino security, the one over by Sokovsky's door.
Actually, it does feel pretty good. When these two do it in sync, it's like the Zukovsky's backing dancers. Maybe you should take these girls to perform with his mistress Elena, actually. I think they'd really liven up her act. Anyway, back to the game. Returning to Zukovsky with the money completes the level, with the legitimate businessman revealing to Bond that Elektra's head of security, Davidov, is in league with Renard. The next level is Nightwatch, a stealth-based one in which Bond must collect evidence of Davidov's connections to Renard, bugging telephones, photographing evidence, and so on. Stealth levels are very rarely ever favourites for me personally, but this actually ticks a lot of boxes, and it's a fun time. I like how the level begins with Bond having just been in bed with Elektra, and the Easter egg of the piano playing the Bond theme is lovely. A feature that would, of course, be included in the next Bond video game from EA, Agent Under Fire. It is a bit silly that you can tranquilize and stun the guards multiple times in a matter of moments and they still wake up seemingly having forgotten everything that had just happened. I mean, some of these guys are passing out more than Bond does in the entirety of 007 Legends. A bit of intel comes through from Charles Robinson that Davidov is leaving soon for Kazakhstan and Bond must intercept him and interrogate him about Renard. This triggers a boss fight of sorts with Davidov, which is really cool. It's an action-packed ending to the level and makes the character of Davidov more of a formidable villain. In the film, despite being played by a renowned Danish actor, the character is bland and forgettable and easily dispatched of. Here, he's a proper end-of-level boss and even has some classic Bond villain dialogue.
Bond, what are you doing here? I have no idea what you're talking about. Besides, you're the intruder. I'm merely doing my job. Kill him!
Of course, Bond succeeds in killing Davidov and takes his place on the flight to Kazakhstan, where he receives his briefing for the next level from MR and Moneypenny, and I love the idea that this is all going on while Bond is in the bathroom of the plane on the way to Kazakhstan.
007, I've upgraded your glasses
Right,
with
yeah,
enhanced
yeah.
night vision, and you'll also have your grappling hook.
I'll be out in a minute.
Always handy in tight spots.
Masquerade begins with Bond snooping around the underground nuclear bunker. This isn't a stealth level exactly, but it's certainly no combat for the most part, which makes the first half of the level something of a bore. You just need to go around various rooms and pick up ID cards and clearance badges and so on, and it's all quite dull and slow, in a large part thanks to the various loading times times between a lot of the level's various sections. It certainly takes a 180 in the middle though, as Bond is thrust into a rapid bit of shooting action, but not before meeting with none other than Dr. Christmas Jones.
Hey, Dr. Arkov. I'm the chief IDA physicist here, and I need to know what your men think they're doing with that nuclear warhead.
Those aren't my men, Dr. Jones. They're terrorists. Now where is that warhead?
They took it down that hall. I also saw one of them remove the locator card.
Now, I know that this was pre-9/11 and everything, but even then, Christmas does take that comment about the terrorists in her stride.
Sure glad I had that Xanax before I came down here.
The action really does kick off as you play through one of my favourite action sequences from the film. The whole bunker shootout is a lot of fun, even with Robinson's ill-timed voice messages.
007. You must stop Renard from escaping with the warhead.
That's all well and good, Charles, but if you'll excuse me a moment, I need to go and stop some Russian terrorists from pumping lead into a very sexy doctor. He does have something of a habit in this game of killing some of the action buzz, particularly as the level music and everything just kind of freezes whenever you have to answer a call from the guy. The bunker level ends with Renard escaping with the bomb, and Bond also escaping with seconds to spare. The next level is Flashpoint, and taking quite a big departure from the film, Renard's men take control of one of Elektra's oil refineries. M is there in the middle of all the action, and you need to go around the various sections of the place freeing hostages. The level kicks off with an hilarious exchange with seemingly the only man running the entire main control room of the refinery.
Quick, how do I get to the maintenance rigs?
If it was that urgent, why didn't you say it sooner instead of letting me walk incredibly slowly towards you?
The pipeline runs all the way to the maintenance rigs, but it's pumping oil right now. If you can shut it down, you can travel through it.
Also, what the heck is up with this guy's voice? Did they just run out of voice actors and grab someone from the local pub around the corner from the London studio they were recording all this and shove him in front of a mic? Because we're supposed to be in Azerbaijan, and this guy sounds like he should be flogging fruit in Covent Garden. Anyway, this is another one of my favourite levels of the game. It's a great bit of action, saving some civilians, taking out some bad guys. I do get anxiety that I'm just leaving M alone in this facility at the start of the level, and the facility is overrun with terrorists. I mean, why couldn't you just stay in London, for God's sake? There's a really cool bit involving putting on some Q glasses, though, which help you see in the dark, which is something that I don't think has worked so well in other Bond games, the whole night vision thing. Here, maybe because of the lo-fi necessity of this being a PS1 era game, I think it works really well. Things culminate with Bond protecting Dr. Jones while she readies a rig to go chasing the bomb into the pipeline. Once again, anytime a Bond game makes you protect someone while they do something, I have Natalia GoldenEye flashbacks and my palms get sweaty and dogs start forming into packs and blood starts seeping from the walls, but here, it's fine. It actually works. And so the level ends with Bond and Jones jumping onto the rig and chasing down the bomb. Through clips from the film, we see Bond and Jones discover that half of the plutonium is missing from the bomb, meaning that it couldn't go nuclear, but Bond, suspecting something afoot, allows a big chunk of the pipeline to be destroyed. Meanwhile, M is kidnapped, so appropriately, the briefing for the next mission comes directly from Robinson, though I would have loved to hear a relatively covert briefing from M while she was en route to Istanbul.
007, I'm currently in a potato sack in the back of a van. It all got a bit soap opera and I slapped Elektra, who it turns out is the main baddie, and now I'm being kidnapped. Your mission is to rescue me, foil Elektra's plan, rescue me, find out where the bomb is, rescue me, and, oh, did I mention, rescue me? The next level is based around the shootout at Zukovsky's Caviar Factory. Appropriately, it's heavy on the action, with many goons to shoot, helicopters to fire rockets at, and there's even a nice little cameo from Bond's BMW Z8. It's quite a tough level, really. I mean, those helicopters pack a punch, and there's a great variety of weapons to use, firing rockets is really cool, and the final helicopter requires a little bit more legwork to take down. It's kind of like a mini-boss. I would even perhaps go so far as to say that this is the hardest level of the game. Things end with Zukovsky telling Bond that Elektra's hideout is somewhere in Istanbul, which leads on to the next level, which involves hunting down bullion after he plants a bomb at one of Zukovsky's operations. An exploding pen is added to Bond's arsenal here, and it's obviously hard not to think about GoldenEye with such a device. By the way, am I the only one fascinated by John Cleese's wet and nasally intakes of breath throughout his dialogue in this entire game?
Now, I've equipped you with a magnetic explosive pen device that can destroy doors or barriers. Just click it 3 times, attach it, and step back. A 3-second timer counts down before the charge is set off. And do be careful, 007. I have a feeling Bullion wants to be chased.
Did he have a cold when he recorded this or something? I keep reaching for the tissues to give to him. I just want him to blow his nose, for goodness sake. I also love how at this point in the game, Moneypenny has just given up on being flirty or witty and is just stating the obvious.
Bullion's most distinguishing feature is his gold teeth. It shouldn't be hard to spot him.
You're obviously going to end up with the hot nuclear physicist, so I don't care anymore. Besides, my time will definitely come when they make the video game adaptation of Die Another Day. Haha.
The appropriately titled Turncoat Mission is one of my favourites in the whole game. Another very action-packed one, lots of weapons, lots of things to do. I love that it partly takes place on Istanbul's metro system, and the soundtrack for this level is really cool as well. I'm having my most fun on a Bond shooter when I'm blasting through rooms with the Bond theme blaring. It's great stuff. Also, shout out to the guy who not only sleeps through a shootout, but was also bold enough to take up 6 whole spaces on a public transport network to begin with. Not only must Bond capture Bullion here, he must foil the henchman's own little scheme, which would involve pumping deadly gas into the city's subway system. I have no idea how this little extra assignment would assist Elektra's overall scheme, but it's a nice side mission all the same. The overall level, however, inevitably ends up with Bond and Jones being captured by Bullion and Elektra's other goons. Next up is the penultimate level of the game, Fallen Angel, beginning with a cutscene from the film where Elektra tortures Bond with the strangle chair thing. It's a much truncated scene from what we have in the movie, and Zukovsky bursts in relatively quickly, but wouldn't it have been awesome if you had to play through Bond being tortured?
Was this all about the oil?
It is my oil. Mine. And my family's.
As in the film, Elektra shoots Zukovsky, who uses his cane gun to free Bond before passing out. So the mission here is find and free M. You begin the level weaponless, so some stealth techniques are needed to arm up. And while I'm here, can I just say how much I love that all the doors in this game, regardless of whether they're made of wood or metal, just sort of fold like paper when they open? For this level, you're blasting your way around Maiden's Tower. There are a couple of nice boss battles with both Bullion and Elektra's guard Gabor during the level, and it's nice to see some minor characters from the film receive more expanded roles here. You eventually find M and use the pen explosive to release her, and given the sound that plays over her dialogue, I'm guessing she's quite hungry.
Just a minute, James. When I was imprisoned, I overheard some numbers that I think are connected to the tower's electronic security system.
Was that your tummy grumbling, Mum? Don't be ridiculous, 007. Anyway, as I was saying, the chips might look to be down, and I don't quite know what Elektra's beef is, but... beef. Mum? Right, yes, sorry, there's only one more thing to say. Pizza Hut, McDonald's, KFC, fish and chips, big greasy dripping kebab, crisps, chocolate milkshakes, tapas, all-you-can-eat shrimp buffet.
In an unexpected turn, M saunters out of her cell, and when I say saunter, I mean wow. I mean, I suppose just because you've been pooing in a box for a couple of days doesn't mean you should lose style. Anyway, you then need to protect M while she is getting shot at while opening the door to Elektra's chamber so that Bond can find the villainous and her dodgy as hell French accent.
I told you. I have a certain power over men. I turned Renard, just like I turned you.
Whoever the voice actress was for Elektra in this game, I think severely misunderstood the character. In fact, I'm fairly convinced that she thought that she was playing Monsieur Aubergine from A View to a Kill.
Perhaps we should add this butterfly to our collection?
There's no point in living if you can't feel alive, Mr. Bond.
Things climax with Elektra about to execute M, but in another moment taken from GoldenEye, just like you have to kill Orumov before he shoots Natalia, here you have just seconds to take out Elektra before she shoots M. From a gaming perspective, this obviously works, but I do think there's something quite special about the coldness of how Bond kills Elektra in the film, and I would have liked to have seen that replicated here, but admittedly it might not have been as exciting as her with a gun to M's head. I'm just glad that they let the player play through this moment at all, instead of just letting it play out as a cutscene, which they could easily have done. This leads us into the final level of the game, Meltdown. Defeat Renard and saving Dr. Jones being the primary objectives. This is a tough level and took me a good few attempts to beat, not helped by the fact that the game glitched out on one of my attempts and I got stuck up in the ceiling, but anyway, it's a really great final level with the toughest goons you'll face in the entire game. I like how vibrant and colourful the level is in places, and I like the variety of obstacles thrown at you, particularly one little feature where you have to get through this room, but the radiation levels are so high, you have to do it in like a specific time before your health starts depleting, and then they throw in these terrifying hazmat-suited goons, and I mean, seriously, is Renard hosting the KKK on this submarine? Anyway, throw all that together and you have something very challenging. I couldn't remember an awful lot about this game, and to be perfectly honest, it's been at least between 18 and 20 years since I played it, but one of my lasting memories from it was this damn radiation room. The final showdown with Renard is a bit disappointing. There's no shootout with him. You just have to destroy the central computer core while he's putting his massive golden rod into the wall in another room, and then you press a button and the rod impales him, and that's that. I mean, to say that we had quite good and exciting boss battles with Davidov, Bullion, and Gabor, it's a shame that Renard doesn't get something similar. It's just all very abrupt. They have this cool arena set, and I was sure that Renard would pop out at, you know, after you've shot some goons for a while and you have to shoot out with Renard, but he doesn't, and it's just incredibly disappointing that the game makes absolutely nothing of the villain's main gimmick, that his senses are depleting to the extent that he doesn't feel pain. It's a really video gamey concept anyway, so I think it's a shame that we don't have a level where you're like shooting at Renard but he's impervious to bullets and you need to figure out other ways to take him down. It's a shame that there's nothing like that in here. Anyway, it's a race back to release Dr. Jones, and then you head with her into the torpedo room as the clock counts down and the game comes to an end with a truncated edit of scenes from the film, excising the whole MI6 using a satellite to look for Bond and the Christmas only comes once a year line, which is such a shame. It's the best line in the film. Then it's the credits. Fans of 007 Agent Under Fire will notice the version of the Bond theme as the same version from that game, and indeed there are many similarities between the two games, and indeed Agent Under Fire did begin life as a version of The World Is Not Enough for the PS2 and the PC before becoming an original story. Which is nuts to think about. We could have had so many different variants on this game. Like, we already had PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Game Boy Color, and then throw in PlayStation 2 and PC as well? For someone who loves Agent Under Fire as much as I do, there is a certain DNA that runs through both games. There's the music and the weapons, yeah, but there's also some, I don't know, some undefinable quality that has the games feel like siblings. Agent Under Fire is definitely the better of the two games, don't get me wrong, and there's more reason to revisit that game too, as World Is Not Enough for the PlayStation 1, in quite an astonishing move, features no multiplayer at all. The only replayable draw, really, is to defeat the game on its different difficulties and beat your previous scores, as every level ends with an evaluation of your efficiency, accuracy, health, and time. There are also some cheats to unlock as well, including the ability to be invulnerable, have all the weapons, and infinite ammo. Personally, I've never really gone to the effort to try and unlock these cheats, and some of them sound super fun and similar to ones that we have in GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, and I have no doubt that they would be fun here and add to the replay value, but I don't know, maybe it's because this game lacked the same social functionality that GoldenEye did that I just didn't feel like returning to it all that much. GoldenEye multiplayer was a staple of childhood, and Agent Under Fire and Nightfire are games that me and my friends dissected beyond the realm of what any normal player would do. We loved those games so much, and as a result of that, The World Is Not Enough just kind of fell through the cracks. Don't get me wrong, I know I'm sounding like a bit of a downer on the game right now, but to sum up, it is a really fun, above-solid shooting game with just the right amount of Bond flourishes to make it feel like a true 007 game, and it can proudly sit on the shelf next to its more accomplished cousins. The levels are nicely designed, the controls good and responsive for the era, there's enough variety in the gameplay to keep things varied and interesting. It's all great stuff. However, when it ultimately comes down to, do you recommend the game to Bond fans when it would require either tracking down a PS1 or dusting off the old PS2, getting it down from the attic, and finding all the necessary cables to connect to a modern TV, and just the general effort that one has to go to play a game of this age now? Taking all that into account, for a Bond fan, is it worth it? Well, if you are indeed a big fan of Bond games and you have one of the relevant consoles to hand and you can pick up the game cheaply, I would say definitely give it a whirl. If you have to go to the effort of procuring a whole console to play it, I think there are better Bond games out there that require a fan's attention more and would justify such expense and effort. The World Is Not Enough is sadly not one of those games, but you know what, I had an absolute blast revisiting this on the PlayStation. There's certainly not the GoldenEye nostalgia attached to this one, but it is a good enough time for a Bond fan, particularly if you're a fan of the movie and of just the general 90s aesthetic of Bond, as I am. There is a counterpart World Is Not Enough game that was released for the N64, which I never actually played as a kid, but I will be looking at on this channel at some point in the future. But before we move on to a different console, there is just one more PlayStation 1 Bond game that we have to look at in the form of Tomorrow Never Dies, which is the next video game that I will be looking at in this series. That is it for this time, Bond fans, but if you've enjoyed this video, then please do consider hitting the like button below, as well as the subscribe button if you would care to stay up to date on the future Bond video game reviews I will be uploading to this channel, and below you can also find links to my various social media pages. My Twitter and my Facebook links are below, as well as a link to my Patreon page if you've really enjoyed what you've seen on this channel and want to go one extra step in supporting it. That's it for this time, Bond fans, so long for now.